Hi, I'm Clarissa Moll, producer and moderator of the Bulletin. Here's a short clip from one of our segments in this week's episode.
Joining me for this conversation is New York Times columnist David French, regular guest here on the Bulletin. David, welcome back.
Thanks so much, Mike. Glad to be here.
So, I think we've all been surprised. We're 3 days into the Trump administration. We're recording this on Thursday morning, and it's been, fairly quiet and uneventful for the past 3 days.
So calm, Mike. I honestly don't know why you asked me on the podcast, because we've got nothing to discuss.
Nothing to discuss. I mean, this is the most drama-free presidency of my lifetime. And I'm happy to say it. Okay, obviously we're joking. There's been a lot, and in fact, there's so much that's happened. It's hard to even really know where to begin. We just wrapped, segment 2. We just had this conversation with Justin Gibney about a lot of sort of domestic policy things that have already begun, immigration policy things that have already begun. Where I want to pick up the conversation with you is actually on the January 6th pardons.
Right.
For those who didn't sort of follow this closely, I mean, Trump said he was going to do this all through the campaign. He promised this. He featured them. He referred to them as the January 6th hostages and featured them at his rallies. In the days right before his inauguration, people like J.D. Vance and Mike Johnson, made these statements saying, well, he's going to do the pardons, but he's not going to pardon anybody who committed violence against cops or anything like that. And then he pardoned everybody with a few exceptions who got commutations of their sentences, but they are all out. So everyone's out. What do you make of it?
Yeah, so I think the short answer of saying this, of responding to this, is I had a question going in. Not much of a question, Mike. A very small, tiny question going in, whether Trump would see his mandate as sort of governing for the 17 million or the 76 million. Okay, and here's what I mean. The 17 million are his primary voters. That's the beating heart of MAGA. These are the folks who have been with him through thick and thin. So he had 17 million primary voters that made him the Republican nominee again. So when you think about the 17 million primary voters, think about rally Trumpists, the folks who sort of live in this MAGA extended universe of grievances and rage. And then there's the 76 million. And the 76 million is the number of people who voted for him for the presidency against Kamala Harris. Roughly 76 million. I don't know what the exact final total is, but roughly that number. And those are the folks, it includes the 17 million, it includes the hardcore MAGA, but it also includes a ton of people who they just wanted lower inflation. They want a more calm border. They want a more calm world. And these are the voters, this bulk of voters are the people who've been tossing out Republicans and Democrats every 2 to 4 years at an extraordinary rate. I mean, a lot of Americans, especially younger Americans, don't realize how unusually unstable our government has been. 4 changes in the control of the House in 20 years, 4 changes in control of the Senate, 4 changes in control of the presidency. That's a lot. And that's very ahistoric. That's not normal. And so I was wondering, I had some small, when I say wondering, this is all small wondering. Would Trump see his mandate really as to do the big stuff, less inflation, calm the world, or to indulge the grievances? And we're very clearly seeing that he's definitely chosen to indulge the grievances. Now, that doesn't mean he's going to ignore the other stuff, but he's definitely opening with the grievances. And this is very dangerous for the rule of law, Mike, because you cannot separate out the pardoning of violent criminals who assaulted police officers on his behalf from also the decision to remove Secret Service protection from a number of his political enemies. So John Bolton, no Secret Service protection. Why does he have it? Well, in 2022, a member of the Iranian Revolutionary Guard Corps was arrested in a murder plot. Okay. And so Secret Service protection lifted for Mike Pompeo. Again, somebody who is in the crosshairs of the Islamic Republic, of the Iranian government. So what he's sending a message here is, for my friends who commit violence on my behalf, the law does not apply to you. I have lifted my royal scepter and given you a pass. I've given you a reprieve. But if you are opposed to me, you're going to be more vulnerable, even to assassination. Even to assassination. So, let's think about that for 5 seconds, Mike. That's horrific. That is absolutely horrific. And what kind of message does that send to people who are going to exercise their First Amendment right to criticize Donald Trump?
Yeah, I have to say, I think that I think one of the most disturbing moments in the week was that, moments after he issues these pardons, the QAnon shaman, people recognize this is the guy with the bull horns and the fur hat and no shirt on January 6th. Moments after
right.
the pardons were issued, he tweeted and basically said, thank you, President Trump. This is so great. I'm going to go buy guns, right? Because as a convicted felon, he's, unable to purchase firearms. There's no subtlety to that response.
Nothing.
And especially, in the days before, in the days before the inauguration, I went back and, it was around January 6th. I went back and I watched a number of documentaries about January 6th and the events of that day. How truly violent the day was. How truly vile the treatment of Capitol Police was on that day. And what I can't tell is have Trump supporters blotted it out and forgotten it completely, like just sort of out of sight, out of mind, or are they where a lot of these J6ers are, and saying what we did was justified and we would do it all over again, which is what many of these people are saying as they get out of prison right now.
So I would say there's sort of three broad categories here. Category number one would be hardcore MAGA, which was Stuart Rhodes, head of the Oath Keepers, I believe. When he came out, they asked him, do you have regrets? No, no regrets. So hardcore MAGA would say the Republic, they were fighting to save the Republic. These are patriots who are fighting to save the Republic. And so therefore they should be pardoned, even if they cracked skulls of police officers. They were fighting, this was the Second American Revolution, right? So that's a pretty small number of people, but it's very real, and that's the circle of people who have the most influence with Trump himself, and probably reflects Trump's own views more than those would be likely closest to the views of the president. Then the second is, I didn't like January 6th. A number of Trump supporters would say, but they were obviously, in their view, prosecuted more vigorously than the rioters around the George Floyd protests. So I don't like it either way, but what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and if these rioters are going to be let off. But a lot of that depends on it's just a myth that the rioters were let off. There were lots and lots of prosecutions. One of the differences is they were different jurisdictions, so state governments and local governments prosecuting rioters, and not the federal government, because most of the rioting was involving commission of state crimes, not federal crimes. So there's a sense of disparate treatment that's often based in a lot of misinformation. And then the final category isn't so much that they blotted it from their mind, Mike. They never really knew how bad it was, or knew much about it at all. I think this is a category that those of us, like if you're listening to this podcast, guarantee you're somebody who pays an unusual amount of attention to politics. And so you know all about January 6th. You've seen the horrible images. You've seen the video clips. I am not lying when I say there are lots and lots and lots and lots of Americans who've seen almost none of that. Even right after it, when it was still fresh, like the tear gas was still clearing from the Capitol. There were a lot of people I interacted with who saw none of the really awful footage, because the really awful footage wasn't on the main network feeds. It didn't come until later. And so there's a lot of ignorance, Mike, about January 6th. And the Trump and the pure MAGA actually contributes to that ignorance, because every time you try to raise it again, the immediate response is everybody knows about that old news. But that's not the case. And I know there are people listening who are going, David, are you kidding me? Everybody knows about this. Guys, you will never lose money betting on the ignorance of current events of the American public. I'm sorry. And look, I get it. Like, people are busy and politics is toxic and it's unpleasant. And I understand why people make rational decisions to tune out. But tuning out has consequences. And one of those consequences is you will vote for somebody who's committed terrible actions that you're not aware of, or that you think are exaggerated, or you're only dimly aware of. And this is something that happened. If you look, one final point on this, if you look at who people voted for based on how and where they received their information, there's this interesting breakdown. If you're somebody who regularly gets the news, people voted for Kamala Harris. If you're somebody who gets no political news at all, they overwhelmingly voted for Donald Trump. And so that dynamic, I saw somebody funny on Twitter say, that's the real gulf of America, is the gulf between those people who actually pay attention to politics and don't pay attention at all.
Listen to the full episode wherever podcasts are found.